All right, great. Yeah, thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Michaela. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this presentation on using ARIA-live to create more dynamic web page. My name is Philip Steer. I am a Drupal certified senior developer and tech lead here at Atten.
And my name is Michaela Liederman. I'm the Senior Accessibility and QA Lead at Atten Design Group. I'm also a certified web accessibility specialist through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to leave them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we should have time at the end to address them. So let's dive in. Let's talk about what we're going to go over today. We'll be talking about WAI-ARIA and what it is. We'll go over some of the basics and background of ARIA-live attribute. Then I'm going to pass it over to Phil, who will go into more detail about using ARIA-live with some popular CMS platforms. And then Phil will be showing us a few real-world examples, diving into the code, how it looks to a visual user, and how it sounds using a screen reader. For reference, the screen reader that we'll be using in our demos will be VoiceOver, Apple's proprietary screen reader. So before we can really see how to implement ARIA-live in our code, I think it's important to talk about some of the basics and background of WAI-ARIA. WAI-ARIA is the technical name, but you more commonly hear it as just ARIA. So what is it? Well, WAI-ARIA stands for the Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. Take note, we are not going in depth about the background and basics of ARIA today, if I had just done a previous webinar on that, as well as a recently published blog post. I'll have Jenna put both of those links into the chat so you have access to those. However, I do think it's important to get some of the baseline knowledge before diving in even deeper to ARIA-live. I do recommend checking out the past webinar and the blog post to really understand ARIA in depth. So first, ARIA enhances assistive technology interaction of web pages in ways that plain HTML just cannot do. It tells a screen reader how something will work via assistive technology based on how it is visually styled on the web page, even if you visually cannot see it. So think tabs or accordions. You're looking at it, you know exactly that if you click on one tab, it's going to show more information. And the same with accordions. There is no HTML element for that, so we make sure we use ARIA to elaborate. Most importantly, ARIA conveys information to assistive technology. It does not change functionality for a user. It is solely made for users of assistive technology to gather more information about what is happening on the page, what to expect when they interact with the element, especially as websites become more and more dynamic and interactive. Because remember that classes, IDs, and any visual styling is never conveyed to a screen reader user, so we must be conveying that in a different way through sound. Support across browsers and screen reader combinations are overall really great, mostly. However, we will be learning that there are so many ARIA features in so many browsers and assistive technology combinations that some instances just may not be great to use. And ARIA can be targeted within your CSS and your JavaScript. So for instance, maybe it's time to start adding in ARIA current equals true and targeting that instead of adding an active class to your menu item within your main navigation so that you can style it so that you're using the active class to make it red, bold, and underlined, but a screen reader is not going to get that information. So in order to make sure that they're also knowing which class is active, we use ARIA current. And because we can target that with CSS, we no longer need that class name. And the following two bullets, we are not going over in detail about in this presentation because I did go over them in depth in my previous webinar. They are, however, still worth mentioning today because they are vital to understanding ARIA, but especially with live regions. So ARIA is made up of three main components: roles, states, and properties. In each of these dictate the kind of value you give the ARIA attribute, whether it's true or false, an ID or text, and what it's conveying to the user. And you want to make sure that you follow the 5 rules of ARIA according to W3C, as this gives direct approach to the do's and don'ts of implementing ARIA correctly in your code. And finally, the most important thing you need to know about using ARIA in your code is the golden rule of ARIA. No ARIA is better than bad ARIA. If you learn anything today, this is it. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but too much or incorrect ARIA can actually create a worse experience or even a completely inaccessible website, especially within live regions. And I see this all the time with our accessibility reviews from sites built elsewhere, where the developer was clearly trying to be good about digital accessibility and they know that ARIA can be very important, so they put it everywhere on absolutely everything. But you need to remember that it's better to work without the extra context from ARIA than it is to be completely unusable, where someone may not be able to focus on an element, they can't interact with an element, they can't check that checkbox, they can't submit that form, navigate a semantic hierarchy, and so on. So now that I got that out of my system, let's jump into some of the basics of ARIA-live. So ARIA-live is used to announce to screen reader users of dynamic content changes on the page that are visual, but do not announce the user of that change. So if a section of the screen updates, it's usually visually styled in a way to be noticeable, so sighted users will notice these live updates. Screen readers, on the other hand, only focus on one part of the page at a time, and that part may not be where the update is occurring. So for example, maybe you have like a search listing or like a resource listing, and you have a big view of all these different resources and filters that you can be working with. You filtered the criteria a little bit, and now you're hitting clicking the filter page button. To a visual user, you're now going to see that content has changed on the page, or maybe there are no results, but to a screen reader user, they're still focused on that button. So they need some kind of announcement that something has changed, that there are now 3 things to look at, there is nothing to look at, and so on. And ARIA-live can be applied to any HTML element. However, when using ARIA-live, the content that updates must be set on an empty element on load. And not only that, it must be present in the DOM on load. You cannot insert an ARIA-live attribute after the DOM has loaded. Assistive technology has already created their accessibility tree, and they will not account for that and will not make those appropriate announcements. And developers must use JavaScript to inject unique text to text about the updates on the page into the empty element. And that unique text must be short and succinct while still describing the page. And it's because it's only read once to the user, and it cannot be replayed by a user. So if you're giving information that's a lot of content, or maybe it's something that they have to kind of memorize or remember before they work with the next steps in a form or something, that's something they're not going to be able to replay. So we just want to keep it short and succinct and still let the user know that something has changed. It also will not read very, very long strings. It is assistive technology and browser dependent. I can't give you like, keep it under 250 characters, because there is no exact amount. And a screen reader user can actually interrupt when that's being played anyway. If they already know, okay, things have changed, let me keep moving on and navigate the screen, they're not going to listen to the entire announcement. And finally, avoid misuse, and do not use this for dynamic content that is not critical, as this just adds noise. Literally, it adds noise for screen reader users. Similar to how visual users can get overwhelmed and distracted by a page with content that is just a ton of text. It's probably small text, short line length, long or short spacing between leading, I think is what it's called, with a long line length, no visual breaks. A screen reader can be overwhelmed with too much verbosity in the code. So keep it simple and only use when needed. And when it comes to ARIA-live, we need to always remember that when in doubt, just refresh the page or take the user to a new page. Doing this automatically alerts the screen reader user that something has changed on the page. If you feel that you may be doing ARIA-live wrong, or you don't have the ability to properly test your ARIA-live, if you don't have users to confirm that it's working correctly, then it may just be worth scrapping that JavaScript interaction and just simplify that experience by refreshing or taking the user to a new page instead. So let's talk a little bit more about ARIA-live. There are 3 values you can add if you're using this ARIA. There's ARIA-live polite, assertive, and off. Keep in mind, there are other similar things that announce to the user automatically, like a role equals alert, a role status, role marquee, and so on. But for the sake of understanding how live regions work, I want to start with ARIA-live, because understanding the functionality of this attribute helps to understand how some of these other roles work and can expand on those scenarios in your accessibility journey. So ARIA-live polite. This is an announcement of the region that will not interrupt the current task. This will only present the updates to the region at the next graceful opportunity, such as the end of the speaking of the current sentence, or maybe when the user has paused typing within an input. This is the recommended setting to use because, as it says, it's polite. We love polite people. We love polite technology. Next is ARIA-live assertive. These announcements in the region will interrupt the current task because it indicates that the updates to this region have the highest priority and should be presented to the user immediately because it is time sensitive. This value should only be used if the interruption is imperative for users to know immediately, like instances where maybe you have a form or someone's doing a test and you're working on it and it's time sensitive and there's 15 seconds left. Or maybe you're going to be logged out due to inactivity, or you're reaching a character count in an input, which is critical to functionality. You need to let them know that there's 5 characters left, 4, 3, 2, 1, and so on. However, avoid this unless absolutely necessary. And ARIA-live off. This indicates that the updates of the region should not be presented to the user unless the user is currently focused on that region. A good example of this is maybe you have something that updates in real time. So maybe you have your social media feed that's constantly updating every 3 minutes or something, stock market updates that's constantly going, and so on. We don't want to inform the user every single time this updates because they're probably focused on a different part of the page, reading important content, which is probably the reason why they went to the site anyway. So you want to make sure that they're only there if they're interested in hearing that information is the only time we want the focus in the announcements. With ARIA-live, there are also some associated ARIA that can accompany it to give it more clarification. For the sake of today's live demos and presentations, we kept the demos of ARIA-live super simple, so you may not see some of these instances being used or talked about in depth, but this is just to get a better understanding of ARIA-live usage in general. So there's ARIA Atomic, Relevant, and Busy. So let's talk about ARIA Atomic. ARIA Atomic indicates whether assistive technologies will present all or only parts of a changed live region. So basically, when the content within a live region changes, the DOM is traversed from the changed element up through its ancestors to find the first element with an ARIA Atomic set. This determines the type and amount of content that the user should be presented with. So if you have a lot of content in your div that has the ARIA-live on it, but only a little small element within that, like a span or maybe a div or an H2 or something gets updated with text that changes, without ARIA atomic set to false, only without ARIA atomic set, or if it's set to false, only the small interior element like the span or the div will be read. With ARIA atomic set to true, everything within that ARIA-live div will be included. So let's take a look at this, and just so you can understand this a little bit more. So here I have code. It's the exact same thing on the top and bottom. We have an ARIA-live polite paragraph with some text within that says total price with a span ID total price, and that's the piece that's going to be changing, that total price span. Now the difference between the two is the bottom one has ARIA atomic true on it. So without ARIA atomic present on that top version, the only thing that will be announced to the screen reader upon change is the content that is changing, which in this case, as I mentioned, is the total price. So let's say this is a cart on a website that you're buying something. So you added something to your cart and the total price is now $20 and now it's $40 and so on. In this case, the screen reader will only announce $19.99, $20, $40, $50. Now, if you have ARIA atomic true on this ARIA-live paragraph, they'll include everything within the ARIA-live parent. So we have total price $19.99, total price $30, total price $50. So it gives a little bit more context and information to the user so they can understand a little bit more of what's going on. You can achieve the optimal result by including this ARIA atomic true or excluding it, depending on your situation. But you can also just achieve this if you are changing out the entire text every single time as well. But if you want to streamline some of the code, you can leverage this. Now, ARIA relevant is something I see in a lot of the defaults for some of these CMS related ones, like the default WordPress code that Phil's going to show you, but it isn't something I actually recommend using, and definitely do not rely on this. I toyed with the idea of going into more detail about this one, but honestly, I do not think it was necessary. I do, however, think it's necessary to bring up because I do see it so often. Overall, the accessibility community as a whole recommends you just ignore ARIA relevant or remove it if it's in your default CMS code and just rely on the default live region behavior, which is just to speak of all new content, especially because it's an optional attribute anyway. It really works as intended and does not have a lot of real world use cases. So if you do see this, I definitely recommend removing it for now until there is better support overall. And finally, ARIA busy. This is put on a live region and it indicates that an element is being modified and that assistive technologies may want to wait until the changes are complete before informing the user about the update. So for instance, if multiple parts of a live region need to be loaded before changes are announced to the user, you're going to set this to busy true until the loading is complete. Then the developer will use JavaScript to set ARIA busy to false or to remove the attribute altogether so that it will now be read. It is important to note that this may not work on all browsers or assistive tech combinations, especially or just mostly really old ones. So similar to like ARIA relevant, I wouldn't rely on it. It does, however, have better support. So if you find that it is absolutely necessary to hold off on alerting a change for technology that does support it, this is a great way to do that. However, maybe include a fallback just in case. And of course, now that you have all that ARIA-live knowledge, remember that no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Phil, who will be going into more detail about the implementation and usage of ARIA-live.
Yes, thank you, Michaela. Wow, that was a lot of great information. I feel like a lot of developers, myself included, are just now kind of learning about all of this and specifically learning how and when to use it and its importance. Becoming an advocate of accessibility features as a developer has, for a lack of other analogies, leveled up my process and really my career. I'm excited to now take you through implementing ARIA-live announcements. The great thing about CMS systems like Drupal, Backdrop, and WordPress is that there are built-in tools already included that help us make these announcements possible and easy. Any systems that implement helper tools generally utilize base JavaScript functionalities. This is because ARIA-live announcements are meant to be made in real time as part of a web page's display, thus warranting the use of JavaScript. So the majority of what I will be demoing today will be based in JavaScript. I must also note that the CMS systems that I will be mentioning today really focus on the type of ARIA-live announcement: polite, assertive, and off. And that the rest of the attributes, like Michaela has mentioned, atomic and relevant, are either ignored in the APIs or have defaults set when in use. And one more final note that I would like to mention in my examples, and as Michaela has already mentioned, I'll be using Apple Mac's built-in screen reader tools. Since I personally lean heavy towards the Drupal development, the majority of my examples that we'll go through today are going to be based in Drupal. First, you can find documentation on Drupal's JavaScript API and, in particular, accessibility tools within Drupal's documentation. I've formulated a bit.ly link here for you to use. If you haven't noticed or noticed and wondered what it could be used for, Drupal adds a single empty element just before the closing body tag, which I will show you an example here in just a minute. Drupal's JavaScript function for changing the ARIA-live announcement is included with core, but obviously we need to instantiate it with our own custom JavaScript in order to be able to use it. The function for updating ARIA-live announcement div is going to be Drupal.announce. The most common use case across Drupal websites in particular is going to be with any Drupal view that is set up using Ajax. You will need to make ARIA-live announcements every time the listing is refreshed with new data, often upon filtering the results of that listing. Here is both what the final div will look like, as well as how to call Drupal core's JavaScript function. Within Drupal's JavaScript function, which again is Drupal.announce, you simply add the text that you want to be filled inside of the empty ARIA-live div. It's recommended that you pass your text through Drupal's translation function, which is also included in Drupal core. You may also change the ARIA-live attribute type by passing the type in as the second optional parameter. To my knowledge, the Drupal announce function does not feature a way to change the ARIA busy attribute and is always present and always set to false. If that ever needs to change, like Michaela had mentioned, you will need to update it using custom JavaScript outside of the announce function. I mentioned backdrop as well, which, as many of you probably know, is going to be very similar to what we're seeing being done in Drupal. For backdrop, there isn't a lot of documentation surrounding the JavaScript API and in particularly accessibility features, but there's a post about the additions to Backdrop's core JavaScript API. Again, I've formulated a bit.ly link here for you to use. Obviously, Backdrop is going to be very similar to Drupal, and in that regard, the empty ARIA-live announcement div is going to be added before the closing body tag. Same as Drupal, Backdrop's JavaScript function for changing the ARIA-live announcement is included with core, but we need to instantiate it with our own custom JavaScript. The function you'll use to update the ARIA-live announcement div is backdrop.announce. The example use case is exactly the same as Drupal, views listings. Of course, Backdrop's ARIA-live announcement div looks similar to Drupal. And because of that similarity, the JavaScript function, again, is backdrop.announce with all the same options and parameters. Of course, I also mentioned WordPress, which treats ARIA-live announcements actually very similar to Drupal and Backdrop, with just some subtle differences. For WordPress, you can find the documentation for ARIA-live announcements under the best practices section of the WordPress documentation, bit.ly link here. Instead of a single div like Drupal in Backdrop, WordPress adds two different empty divs just before the closing body tag, one for assertive and one for polite announcements. WordPress's JavaScript function for changing the ARIA-live announcement is included with core, but obviously, like other CMS solutions, we need to instantiate it with our own custom JavaScript. The function for updating ARIA-live announcements is going to be wp.a11y.speak. A common example for this in WordPress is on Ajax forms to announce whether a submission has either been successful or has failed. You would hook the announcement function into an Ajax callback so that the appropriate ARIA-live announcement div is updated accordingly. Here is both what the final divs will look like, as well as how to call WordPress's JavaScript function. Very similar to Drupal and Backdrop, you add your announcement text in as one of the parameters to the function, as well as the ARIA-live type, which in turn determines which empty div gets the announcement text. And now we dive into JavaScript, like the entirety of JavaScript. You didn't think you would be getting a full tutorial on JavaScript, did you? I'm really just kidding. Talking about JavaScript as a whole would take lots and lots of webinar sessions. I'll talk to Jenna about that. I'm simply going to focus on a single tool that vanilla JavaScript has to offer to assist in updating these ARIA-live announcements. We're about to go further into the actual implementation aspect of the ARIA-live announcements, and I just wanted to preface with a note that I am, again, heavily weighted towards Drupal development, and that the examples we're about to go through are based within the Drupal set of code standards. However, most of this should be easily applicable to just about any other system. I'm a big purveyor of vanilla JavaScript, so instead of hooking into an Ajax callback like you would in the WordPress example, or with jQuery, or using Drupal's announce command in an Ajax response, I will be using a JavaScript mutation observer to set and change the ARIA live announcement dynamically. I always like to refer to MDN web docs for definitions and examples, so that is where this link will lead you to. Mutation observers are defined as an interface that provides the ability to watch for changes being made to the DOM or document object model, or simply the data that makes up your website, your web page. Here's a very basic implementation of the mutation observer. The first line creates a new mutation observer using the mutation observer constructor. How many times can I say mutation observer? The argument passed into the constructor is a callback function that would be called on each DOM change that qualifies. The callback function is where we will be writing all of our announce functions. The last line then calls the mutation observer API with your callback function attached, as well as any options that you want to pass to the observer. You can compare this to add event listeners, where you attach a listener to the page and it will listen for a specified event. Similarly, you will start observing the web page for any DOM changes. The observe method takes two arguments: the target, which should be the node or node tree on which to observe for changes, and any options, and in an options object, which allows you to define the configuration for the observer. Again, more information can be found in MDN or any other how-to articles. I just wanted to briefly detail the tool that I like to reach for when needing to update the ARIA-live announcement in Drupal using vanilla JavaScript. And now we get to dive into some examples, finally, using mutation observer and announce functions within Drupal. This first example will be going through a very simple Drupal view with a couple of exposed filters, which once applied will announce via ARIA-live. Again, we could hook into an Ajax callback or utilize Drupal's announcement command via an Ajax response from the server, but I personally find using a mutation observer a little easier and a little bit more natural to use for this situation. First, we'll be setting up the situation. In this example, and sticking within Drupal realm, I've set up a simple Drupal view, which I will be announcing or updating the ARIA-live announcements according to any changes within this view, particularly with the exposed filters. So here I've set up, again, just a basic view with exposed filters. This view is bringing in articles, content type, and it has filters for title and tags and an apply button as well. So I'm going to jump right into the JavaScript here. This is the way that I generally like to compose my JavaScript, obviously all within kind of the confines of Drupal. This is so that means wrapping everything in the Drupal function, and then setting everything within a behavior. So right at the bottom of my file is where I generally put my behaviors. Then I attach any custom functions then into this behavior. So as you see, I am just searching for any views that are on the page, looping through those views, and then adding my function, my ARIA-live update function here, passing in my view in particular. And in this instance, since Drupal Ajax refreshes the entire view div, I want to specifically go one level up further. So I'm searching for each of the views and then searching for the parent element of those views to be able to run my mutation observer against. Since the view itself with Ajax gets replaced entirely, it becomes impossible to use a mutation observer on the view because it's constantly being removed and changed and edited. So going up to my custom function, you'll start to notice very similar writing to the mutation observer documentation. So I am formulating a callback function. I am setting my observer or the mutation observer interface, and then I'm just initializing all of that within an init function. So using the observer, using the observe method, and then setting what I am observing and any options that I want to observe. So in this instance, I'm only observing childless true and subtree true. And as mentioned in the mutation observer part of this presentation, most of what we will be writing is going to be within the callback function. So here's my callback. I am passing in the different mutations and observer here. So for each of the mutations, I'm just looping through each of the mutations and checking to see if any of them are either a select field or a text field, and then adjusting or dynamically changing whatever I need to change accordingly. So within this callback function, yeah, I am searching for my select filter. I'm searching for my text filter, both of which you can see here in my exposed filter. So I'm searching for these two fields. And then I'm running against, first of all, I'm prepping my announcement text by creating this object where the first part of the object is going to always say now showing results for. And again, it's always recommended to use the translate function, even in JavaScript. So Drupal.t is how you use the translation function. So that's how I'm setting the first part of my announcement text. And then for each of those filter changes, I'm then setting a second part, a second key, essentially for that object, for that announced text object. So for any text filters, I'm going to check to see if it even exists and if it has a value when the mutation observer is triggered. And then I'm going to use that value that is put in the text filter as part of my announcement text. Same with select filters. I am just going to check for the selected index. I'm going to grab the text of that selected index and then populate that as the next iteration to my announced text. And then, as you can see, very familiar, we're using the Drupal announce function. Within my callback here, I'm just collapsing that announced text object and joining all of those strings with a space so that eventually when Drupal makes the announcement change, it'll formulate one simple long string. And then yeah, that's pretty much it. Very simple to change, very simple to call the Drupal announce function, and very simple with a mutation observer to again observe DOM changes and change that announcement text accordingly. And in the next video, I'll show the outcome of all that work. And now to see that custom JavaScript in action, I'm going to make any changes to my filters and watch and listen as the Drupal announcement or the announcement div is changed. So here I have my DOM up so I can see real time the changes that I'm making. I'm just going to search for Michaela and hit apply. And as you can see, the ARIA-live div is changed to say now showing results for Michaela. And to demonstrate that with the screen reader, I'm going to enable my screen reader real quick here.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Articles vertical line ARIA-live. Google Chrome. Window. Articles vertical line ARIA-live. Web content has keyboard focus.
I know the voiceover can be
web content.
a
You are
little
currently on web content. To enter the web area,
lot.
press Control,
a little
Option,
lot.
Shift, down arrow.
I'm going to click into type.
Title, edit text, complementary. You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type.
Okay, so I'm going to type Michaela.
C-H-A-E-F-A. Michela. Form controls menu. Landmarks menu. Form controls menu. Any menu item. Apply button.
And I'm going to apply.
Apply button. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control, Option, Space. Apply button. Now showing results for Michela. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control, Option, Space.
And I'm going to
VoiceOver
cancel
off.
that. So as you heard, it incorrectly pronounced Michaela's name, but it did announce what all of our efforts so far have been for. So it announced now showing the results for Michaela. That example gets me every time. The second example we'll be going through is a little bit more complex, a custom component that will announce region selections on a map, which then dynamically load in different content. And in this example, I just want to demo just outside of Drupal views, another instance where ARIA-live announcements is required, is necessary. We're still, again, within Drupal, but less so, abstracted outside of views. I've created specifically just a little story map that takes you through different countries and regions within those countries. And all of this is dynamically loaded. So as soon as I click one of the region buttons, it takes me to either the whole continent or specifically changes content based on the region selected. I'm going to go back to world. As you've probably been seeing, the live announcement div is being updated every time I click each of these buttons. So if I go to Asia, the ARIA-live announcement says now viewing the Asia region. I can say Southern Asia, now viewing the Southern Asia region. And every time I click, every time content is changed, the ARIA-live announcement gets changed accordingly. I'm going to dive right into the code. There's a lot to this JavaScript, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate what I went through in the Drupal views example. Again, using the Drupal announce, using the translation text here, translation method for Drupal. I'm just triggering this Drupal announcement, and I've put it into a function here just for ease of use, a custom function here for ease of use. So that anytime I make an adjustment, I can call that function accordingly. So I'm scrolling all the way back down to some of my action functions. So if I click on one of those triggers, it does all of these different functions. But here, I'm saying ARIA-live update, now viewing list of regions in particular. Now, if I go down to another action function here, now viewing the world map is here's the ARIA-live when I'm viewing the world map. Now viewing the world map, let's see, on click of one of the markers. So here I'm using ARIA-live update to instantiate the region in particular that a user is clicking on. Now viewing the blank region. All of this is also triggered by keyboard users as well. So any keyboard users clicking on any of those triggers will get the same ARIA-live updates. That all to say, if I go down to my init function, I'm just adding a bunch of event listeners. So those map triggers get an event listener attached to them. And then it runs through that function with the ARIA-live nested function inside of there. Cool. And then real quick, I'll demo the SR, the screen reader.
For the map ARIA-live demo, we want to see it in action. So I've already shown you the ARIA-live announcement changing based on the regions or the triggers that you select. So here it is currently viewing the world map. Click on North America. We can see that ARIA-live has changed here. So now I'm going to turn on my screen reader.
Main toolbar, navigation. Select an element in the page to inspect it. Toggle button. Toggle device toolbar. Toggle button. Panels. Tab group. Elements. Selected. Tab.
Do
1 of 9.
thing
Console.
a lot
Tab.
here.
2. Now viewing North America. Button. Article.
There we go. So
You
we
are
just
currently
heard the
on button.
ARIA-live
To click this
announcement. So
button,
if I
press
click
Control.
to...
Options. ARIA-live demo. Now viewing the world map. Button. Article.
There we go.
You are ARIA-live demo. Now viewing Africa. Button. Article. You are Eastern Africa. Now viewing Eastern Africa. Button. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control. Option. Space. Voiceover off.
And it works. It was announcing the regions accordingly every time it changed.
Cool. Yeah, and of course there are many more applications for ARIA-live announcements, which I'll go through now. You can and should utilize ARIA-live announcements whenever there are dynamically changing content on a page with a select field. Keep in mind that not all select fields need to have ARIA-live announcements, only when the select field is dynamically changing content on a page. You can see in this animated image that content is being changed when a select item is selected, thus also triggering an ARIA-live announcement update. You can and should utilize ARIA-live announcements whenever you're using a step-by-step form that dynamically changes the content on a page. Although I don't have a nice animated image here, for instance, I again want to emphasize that we only need the ARIA-live announcement if the content is being dynamically changed. If the step-by-step form were changing content on a full page refresh, we wouldn't need that ARIA-live announcement. Another instance is for whenever you have forms or filters or faceted search that auto submits for the results. In a lot of instances like these, a front-end framework like React, Vue, or Angular are being used under the hood. Using front-end frameworks generally also requires a lot of ARIA-live announcements due to the dynamic nature of the content. So those were some examples of when ARIA-live would be necessary, and I can't say this enough, and Michaela and I can't say this enough, as is the key. ARIA-live announcements are only necessary when content on the site is dynamically being changed or being changed in real time without any sort of page refresh. So here are some examples where ARIA-live is not necessary, but you think that you might need it. These would include drop-down menus, modal windows, accordions, form inputs, and checkboxes, tabs, and so on. If you are building these correctly based on accessible patterns and correct ARIA, like ARIA expanded, ARIA has pop-up, ARIA tabs, tab lists, tabs panels, etc., then these announcements are given on the components itself and do not require an ARIA-live announcement region. If the example that I showed on the select field was only simply selecting an option and not changing any content on demand, then there would be no need for an ARIA-live announcement. All right, finally, let's recap. I'm going to hand the reins back over to Michaela to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. I always love seeing those examples that you have going there. The map's always really cool to see. So let's talk about just an overall recap of what we learned today. It's important to remember that ARIA-live is used to alert screen reader users of dynamically changing content on the page, like with Phil examples of Drupal views using Ajax form submission responses, custom components that switch out content upon trigger click, a dynamic form with conditional content, success messages upon submitting a form, and so on. An ARIA-live must be set on an empty element on load to properly be added to the accessibility tree. And most, if not all, CMS systems offer inherent JavaScript tools to be able to be added or update ARIA-live announcements. You can either hook into an Ajax callback via custom JavaScript, or if you like a more JavaScript approach, you can use JavaScript's mutation observer interface or event listeners. And avoid overusing or misusing ARIA-live to avoid too much noise. And of course, when in doubt, fall back to a page refresh, because if you are unsure or unable to properly test this all out, then we need to remember that no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. However, if you find yourself still confused or asking what your next steps are, remember that Atten is here to help. We believe in giving back to the community, like doing informative webinars like the one we're doing today, as well as free consultations, which you can sign up for by going to atten.io/accessibility.